When are we going to start the war crimes trials? We touched on this yesterday. Now that we know the extent of the involvement in Iraq, and I would add Afghanistan to that. Somehow that story in the Washington Post that ran before we started dropping bombs on Afghanistan, where the Taliban formally and publicly said to the world's media, okay, 9/11, if you think Osama bin Laden was behind it, show us some evidence, and we will arrest Osama bin Laden and his merry band. There was only a couple thousand of them in the whole country of Afghanistan, and the Taliban certainly knew where they were, and the Taliban had a lot of guns. We will arrest them, and we will turn them over to a third country for prosecution. And George W. Bush didn't even respond. Instead, it was like, okay, let's take a country, Afghanistan. Now, I realize there's all kinds of righteous outrage and indignation. Next month is the 10th anniversary of our starting to bomb Iraq based on lies. But, we're in the 11th year, I think, maybe a little bit more, of the war in Afghanistan. I mean, this is longer than World War II. It's longer than the Korean War. It's longer than Vietnam. This is insane. And somehow we've completely forgotten that it could have been avoided. And what Bush did is he took a country that was the poorest country in the world. Actually, it was the second poorest behind North Korea at the time. A GDP of $2 billion. Now, I mean, just to put that in perspective, I mean, that's a gross domestic product. The entire economic activity of the entire country of Afghanistan every year was $2 billion. Now, we've spent, well over $1 trillion there. That's $2,000 billion. We're spending $1 million per soldier per year to put soldiers in there. We're spending all this money on drones and military equipment. We spent, in the first few weeks, we spent $10 or $15 billion taking down a country whose entire annual gross domestic product was $2 billion. The average income in Afghanistan was $300 a year. We could have saved $1 trillion if we had simply said to the Taliban, you guys, you got a country with an annual GDP of $2 billion. We will double your wealth if you'll commit to using at least half of the money to build schools for girls and other positive things that are going to upgrade the infrastructure of your country and make Afghanistan a better country. And you guys can take the credit for it, because what happens is when you upgrade a country, and particularly when you educate the girls, people like the Taliban, over the course of the next generation, they lose their power. This is like water rolling down a hill. The Taliban is not all that different from the power of the church in the 13th century in Europe. And the Enlightenment came along, and that was the end of that. Excuse me, the Renaissance. As a consequence of the Black Plague, which killed off a third of the Europeans, and so suddenly you had a tight labor market and a middle class emerged in Europe. But I digress. So if we had simply said to Afghanistan, we're going to make you guys rich. Everybody in the country, we're going to double your minimum wage with our money. We'll call it foreign aid. I mean, at that time, we were giving, I believe, about $4 or $5 billion a year to Israel and Egypt, maybe a little more. So, I mean, to get bin Laden, just give us bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda. You guys do the dirty work. Not a single U.S. soldier has to die. And we will give you an amount of money that, the Pentagon spends in a day and doesn't even notice. In fact, we'll give you an amount of money that's a fraction of the $2 trillion that's missing from the Pentagon, period. We can't even figure out where it went. But no, George Bush wanted a war. And so he bombed back to the Stone Age, a country that was already living in stones, literally in houses made of stones. Afghanistan. A country with a $2 billion annual GDP at the time that we invaded them. Now, I realize it's higher now because we're counting all of our economic activity inside that country as GDP. So the CIA fact book now says it's like, what, $10 or $11 billion? Nonsense. Pull us out of there. Take all the military stuff out of there. They're back to they'd probably be $1 billion GDP now because we've damaged so much of the country. But if we had simply gone in with foreign aid and said, fine, here's the evidence about bin Laden. Please send him to Egypt for a trial, or Qatar, or Saudi Arabia, or Pakistan. I don't care. Send him someplace for a trial. We'll agree on it. Here's the information. And by the way, here's a couple $1 billion. Rebuild your country so that the Taliban, so that the Al Qaeda will not have another place to have a foothold. I mean, shouldn't we have learned from the Soviets' mistake in Afghanistan? They tried to fight them for a decade, and it bankrupted the Soviet Union. We're still there.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
So the net of all this is, when do the war crime trials start? I think next week would be a good place.